Cuando exportamos un grano de maíz, atrás o anteriormente ese grano de maíz hay un desarrollo biotecnológico, genético, de ciencia y tecnología, de desarrollo de maquinaria muy importante. Así que la primarización como la conocíamos históricamente en la Argentina hoy no existe.
Pensá en impulsar y potenciar tu campo. En Macro Agro tenés todas las soluciones en un solo lugar en todo el país. Y siempre tenés un oficial cerca para todo lo que necesites. Pensá en grande. Pensá en Macro.
We are Viterra. We are a world-leading agriculture network.
We are a network of storage assets, processing facilities,
terminales del puerto,
logistics, assets,
and marketing offices.
Folyamatosan fejlesztjük a hálózatunkat.
Responding to change and pursuing opportunity.
Büszkék vagyunk arra, amit csinálunk, arra, ahogy csináljuk.
Temos a missão de conectar a indústria agrícola.
To grow our network and build partnerships that last.
Welcome to Viterra.
Welcome everyone for being here today. Let's begin this segment with Ted and Diana, the field, countryside industry or agro-industry, the country we live. I'm going to introduce them formally with a brief curriculum. CV. She is institutional director and finance master degree in SEMA University. She has in charge of, has a lot of experience in companies, Superville Bank, Loma Negra, etc. She was director of the Latin American region for Standard. She was responsible of regional activities. Teddy Carabosian is an economist. He has a master's degrees from Austral University. He's president of the Nepratex, and he is a consumer of 40% of cotton in Argentina, and he is in charge of the Foundation Proteger to help the to promote the growth of Argentine industry. I don't think you will be quiet. I think you have a lot of knowledge to share in terms of industry and agri-industry, the country we live in, and at the same time, the country we can become that is always there, and we feel it's so close to us. Once again, it's a turning point. We feel there's a new opportunity of starting over. Sometimes we see that possibility closer or not. When I was doing a bit of research for this talk, the word that stuck in me is that these are two people with a lot of street education, so to speak. She says mud. And this space, Cuo Vadis, will be closed by the young people. We have been receiving comments saying there's a huge amount of young people at the Congress. That's where the comments were received throughout the Congress. Those young generations that perhaps today are studying, and they are studying a university degree that will finish in 3 to 4 years, will start working, which is the Argentina we want them to have. Those who are thinking perhaps of emigrating, if they want, they should stay here. Our children, in short. So, in order to say this Argentina will take 2 generations to improve, etc., etc. What I would like to ask you is, in these 4 to 5 years, what are the things that should happen as a country so that we can say this is the right time? It finally happened. I'm in the midst of prior to the election, so I cannot speak in detail. We do not want any young people to stay here. I don't want them to stay at the state because they can't think of leaving. So what we need is the whole Argentina, young and the not so young, to be able to have the capacity of the possibility of developing our talent, the capital we inherited, our heritage. Argentina should become sensible so that when people do things right, they can reasonably keep the fruit of their work. When somebody makes a mistake, that person can suffer the consequences.
En términos más serios, que cada uno se
In more serious terms, accountability, to be accountable for your actions. That is to say, you have to tolerate something, but also you have the benefit of doing things right. If this is the case, in the state, the policeman takes care of you, the teacher teaches you, the doctor takes care of your health. That would mean a quantum leap from what we have now. And if on top of that we start doing things very well, not only with common sense, we will quickly have the country we all want. Teddy, one first reflection. When I was young, my father, I'm following my father's business. And I remember when I was not that young, I was in my 20s, he said that there was a trick he made so that I followed in his footsteps, was never to speak ill of the country or his job. And I followed the same strategy. And my children are doing the same. The idea is never to talk ill about our country. Even with all the problems we have a wonderful country. It just many times my friends go to abroad, have a look at this is wonderful. But you don't read the newspapers of the places you visit. So a piece of advice I give, don't read the newspapers because it never reflects this, but they reflect the interest of the people who want you to buy something. Having said this, Argentina has many problems to be worked out that are workable. The difference between the potential Argentina and the Argentina that exists is that those who do things wrong pay for their mistakes, and those who do things right can bear the fruits of their work. Well done. The question is this consequence of the stupidity of Argentine, or a behavior that goes against our interest, or the corruption of Argentines? If the sensation that you get from the newspaper is that we are on a Titanic, the behavior of Argentine is every man for his own. It's when a boat is sinking. It's not true that they say women and children first. I save if I can save myself. So everyone is trying to save themselves. Young people want to leave their country because they don't understand the phenomenon. Politicians want to save themselves. So by using the title of your presentation, one of the things we have is there shouldn't be anything better for an Argentine than another Argentine, and that can be achieved. But we have to make some adjustments in the systems, tweets, or a bit, some changes, a turn of the screw in some changes, and people know they have to make some adjustments because many people do not know. They speak stupid things, and they ruin our possibility to make coordinate actions. I'm an optimist. I have a phrase that in the coming 6 months is going to be this disaster. The next 20 years are going to be spectacular, and we are investing in our company as we have never invested before because we share a very optimistic view. The title of the talk itself is agriculture or industry, or agri-industry. Since Egyptian times, they had an economy based on agriculture, or the Mesopotamia that we studied at school. There was always a relation between agriculture and industry. You can never plant a seed without having a tool to help you. For example, the immense tractors and wonderful tractors you have at South. You cannot save yourself, or that you can perform an activity without the help of a group of people. You cannot have an agricultural industry if you do not have people that live more or less close by. If you do not have a road, you don't have the machinery. If you don't have the technological elements and technological systems in place to develop your business. To think that we have dichotomies is something perverse in Argentina. There's always a dichotomy in Argentina. It's Boca versus River. No, it's football, soccer. And we have to change that mindset urgently. That dichotomy comes from ignorant people. It comes from the people who gain from our confrontation. It's industry and agriculture and services and so on and so forth. And in Argentina, we think in terms of and the choice between one or the other is because it's either or. The country is not sinking, but it's an either or is sensitive. Shall I buy a t-shirt or a pair of sneakers? How can I better use my resources? Education or something else? So it's important to have priorities, and that is something that we should have in Argentina, to establish priorities, to set priorities at state and private level. And in the companies, we are used to that, because you have to choose all the time what are the priorities. We need more companies, right? That's one of the things we need, because we have a lot of workforce. And Teddy, I would like you to talk about this, but let's talk about from the company side. What are the things that we should do in order to generate more companies, and along with it, the creation of more jobs? Many businessmen, and if you hear a professional economist, you will hear them say on TV, we have to lower public expenses, and we are going to lower public expenses by lowering public expenses. But they never. But businessmen, we do not want the state to lower public expenses, because I will sell less public works, less food, less clothes. If we lower state salaries to lower state expenses, or we cancel subsidies, demand's lower. So we have to ask to lower the demand for public expense. To lower public expense increases the gap, because it generates, because when you're a state employee, it generates the fear that they are going to lose their job. But from the point of view of a company, they do not want their resources to be tampered with, but to lower state expenses can only be made with the private sector jobs, and that only can be done if we tackle the problems affecting the private sector. If taxes get lower, I'm not going to hire more people. I'm going to increase investments that are in dollars, that the Laura's Argentina is lacking. So I know how to hire, to quit or to fire people, but many of my clients do not know how to fire people, and they expect for a super sophisticated machine to develop more products with fewer people. But we need to be for the state to be the last resource of hiring people. We need a state to be able to hire more people, so as to increase salaries, increase demands, increase income, and improve the situation administration of the state that employs these people that have no employment, because I, as a private member of the private sector, do not want to do it. We think to have to stop requesting the lowering of the public expense. What do you mean by lower expense? Because we have a long experience in Argentina where the public expenses of your 100 pesos go to pay for something useful. That gives 10 cents to somebody that doesn't do anything. So what we need is productivity leap in the terms of public expenses. It's not to spend less, but to spend more effectively. And filter should disappear. But public expenses in Sweden is 40%, right, or 50%. But they build bridges. In Argentina, they spend this on people that are idle, that are making that leisurely, and since they do not have nothing to do, they come to my company and they bother me asking for forms. It's not that the problem is that for these people not to be in the street, because I did not want to hire them, and as a businessman, they could go to a place where they do not bother. When they started spending in subsidies, and there they took to the streets because these people, they do not have a place where to work. So what I uphold as a different standpoint is, if we would not tackle the problem, there is no way we can lower the emission and expenses. Because I asked very honorable people, how are you going to do that? I'm going to eliminate corruption. How? How are you going to eliminate corruption? No, I'm going to control expenses. How many people are you going to put on the state to control the 5,000 different places where money can leak out? If you increase the demand of employment in the private sector, the pressure to be for corruption will be the same. And even if you are the most honorable people, I know people from the pro party, the next day they got to power in the ministry, they spent more money in the ministry because otherwise they will have no more resources in the ministry and that entity will disappear. And as a good officer, what they have to do, they have to ensure the survival of that ministry. So what I'm saying is, let's be intelligent in what we request as business people, as company leaders, or to propose to have fewer ministries, of course. And that transition with 6 million inhabitants who are not used to being patient, how should we tackle this? The 46 million people, we don't know if we are 46 million because the census is not there, but a big part of the population, 9 million people, those senior citizens that are collecting their retirement fund. We have a huge number of children with a lot of nutrition and education problems. So we have about 20 million people who are in working age, and 6 million of them are in the private sector, the formal private sector. Then you have people who are in the informal working sector, and so their tax contribution and productivity is a bit less. And then you have people that collect from the state because it's either public official or is a teacher, or because he says they have a subsidy. If I'm exaggerating, 7 million people have to support the other millions with a lower productivity. It's not possible because you are supporting your own family plus 2 more families. This is something that has to be modified. I answered this, but was not. And the how? Well, the transition. At the transition, you have different elements. How long do you have, and which are the priorities? In terms of how long, well, 30, 40 years in the future, everybody is going to be educated. Everybody was going to be an agronomist. It's going to be wonderful. But in the next 6 months or 2 years, what we have to do is phenomenal effort of modifying the possibility for these people of the informal sector to join the formal sector, because everybody talks about labor legislation and the phenomenal problems of the judges of the trial labor trials. If you do well, wonderful, but if you do wrong, you cannot modify anything in your company. So it's necessary to modify many reasons why people can hire or let somebody out, and stop having somebody cling to the position they have, but to have the possibility of choosing to live somewhere else. Today, as an employee are in a very rigid situation. These situations will be resisted by some, but there is a very simple mechanism, which is putting in place a new legislation in two ways. Volunteer for some, that's one possibility, or for the whole new generation. Oh, but the past was better. Well, if there is better, it used to be better. Well, it's a new employee has worse conditions than an older employee. Well, you can choose not to opt for that job, or it could be even better, and the old employees think they want to be a part of the new system. This is the experiences throughout many countries in the world, countries that have gone through famine or war, to modify how to hire. So I leave a situation that I think it's negative for a situation which I believe is going to be better. And these are mechanisms that are alive in people. Let me give you an example of a legislation. When somebody dares to go and live in a new city, and they go into a shanty town. In the shanty town, they believe they are going to live better off. But we have a legislation in which it says that that person has to have an address where that person can be notified something. Even if that person has the will to work, that person is not hireable, because our labor legislation makes it impossible for that person to comply with the hiring points, and the security or the insurance is not going to hire you if that person doesn't have, for example, a kidney. But there are things that are modifiable. How can we modify these things?
There are two options which are extreme. One of them is, like burning the boats by changing the legislation, or with something more trivial, by removing the little hindrances, which will correct things little by little. I think that we can still be able to use the pliers instead of having to use the axe. But if we do not hurry up, that will produce a significant shock, and we don't know what will happen there. Okay, the time is come for speaking about your project study. I have the solution, we had rehearsed that, that he was going to talk about that. I totally agree with what Diana was saying, but the truth is that my specialty in my company is what is known as complex systems. I ended up discovering that the weakest point of Argentinian economy is the accumulation of work-related liability. It is the seniority of staff that exists in successful companies. At the end of the day, these companies will be worth nothing, and that compels businessmen to remove all liquidity from the companies, because if the companies are going to be worth nothing, the only money that will be earned by the businessmen will be the money that we remove from the company. Now, the right to compensation is a constitutional right at the same level as private property. So eliminating compensation when people are laid off cannot be done. But what I propose is to have an insurance, so that if there is little turnover, the insurance will be more cheaper, and vice versa, so that we may remove from the company the work-related liabilities, so that our companies are worth money, so that the child of the businessman may be willing to follow on the steps of his father because they are inheriting an asset and not a liability. It has been copied from the Austrian model, but in Europe it is called flexi security. In Argentina we cannot use the word flexi, but what I am proposing to the various politicians is that they begin to talk about a new constitutional right, which is that severance compensation should not just be for the man that I'm laying off, but also the person that lives by himself should also have the right to that constitutional right for severance compensation. So imagine that someone says that the textile industry is not wanted anymore, but let's suppose that, well, how do we go about people working in my sector to go to another sector? If they will lose all of their severance compensation because companies are going to go down, we will not be able to get a shift from the textile worker to another sector, because when he moves from my sector to another sector, if he wants to leave from the city of Buenos Aires to a village in the provinces, he will not lose his seniority with this new proposal that I'm sharing. It's a very lengthy thing, it's very complicated. I'm inviting you to read it. So we say we are going to put an end to compensations, to severance compensation. Of course not. It's a constitutional right and you cannot do away with it. And there's no businessman should say that we should put an end to severance compensation, because that would create a lot of instability and a lack of incentives as well. We have a serious problem in Argentina. The employee that is about to retire, well, he gets a barbecue from his friends, and that's that. Whereas the employee that breaks a machine or that does something wrong ends up collecting a significant severance payment. And we need to rework incentives in Argentina. And we should have equality before the law. We do not have equality before the law because of these regulations. You can introduce these changes and change vacation days and so on, but in what conditions? Also for retirement, after retirement. If we think about this in that way, instead of saying acquired rights, it's totally different the way in which we will focus on the problem. That is to say, I can say, okay, the way I analyze topics, well, what do I have to do to get here, and what road should I take, and rather than what is my situation and how can I improve it, because I may improve it just a little bit in a certain direction, and I may end up in a place that was not my initial destination. Argentina needs to set objectives for itself, and then we will see the how. But if we do not say the what, and back to the example of public expenditure that Teddy was mentioning, with expenditure, what is going on? I am removing money from someone who is not allowed to reinvest or buy his favorite sneakers or take holidays because he's paying for something that is no good. So what we need to do is to allow people to define how they want to save money and what they want to do with their free time. And the objective ends up being totally different to what we have nowadays. But we need to modify people's mentality. If our companies were worth any money, we wouldn't be losing $30 billion per year that leave the frontiers, that leave the country to fund the U.S., to be invested in the U.S. During the Spanish colony, for example, the Spaniards, the adelantados used to come to take away the gold. We got our independence, finally, and silver was changed into money that was given to the Brits, who had lost their U.S. colonies, and Argentina was the most important partner that the Brits used to have. But 40 years ago, what was removed by the Spaniards and then was removed by the Brits, for some time already, we have been removing money from the country ourselves because our companies are worth nothing. And it's not by obligation that that happens. Actually, people lie to take their money out. So what I'm saying is this. In a country where companies are worth nothing, the country will be worth nothing. In a country that is worth nothing, money will leave the country. In a country where companies are worth something, the country will be worth something, and money will flow into the country. So the first thing we need to understand is who is our enemy. Is the enemy the guy that is taking the money away with him, or is the enemy the reason why that person leaves with his money? Is the enemy the company that is worth nothing, or is it the reason why it's worth nothing? Is the enemy the guy that sues me because he wants to have a severance payment, or the reason for the trial, for the lawsuit? So there was this person that I was talking with yesterday who's German, and she said in pretty much the same way as Germans are famous for being very accurate, Argentinians are well known for our capacity to adapt rapidly. If we find a system whereby the incentives system does not reward the bad employee, and gives money to the person that leaves willingly and after having been a good employee, I think that the chances for growth of Argentina could be 10% per year, as it happened with China for 30 years on a road, and that would restore us to the position that we should never have lost. Together with what Teddy is saying, we talk about this topic because Argentinians are worried about this, because employment is our main source of resource generation. But we have something else. The minimum employment indicators established by AFIP, which is the RSI, where the AFIP determines that for a certain level of production, you should have an X amount of employees. And if you didn't have them because it supposes that they were hired under the counter, you have to pay your taxes anyway. As you have to pay those taxes anyway, and you have a limit, what do you end up doing? You hire people in the black market, or you do not hire the people that you should have hired, because you will have to pay for that anyway. There are lots of things that can be removed. There is a big battle with the unions, which will have to do with convincing them that this is good for people. This is Teddy's proposal, or maybe another proposal that may modify the system. But there are a lot of battles that we have to fight within the state. There are lots of regulations, for example, organ ablation or minimum work indicators. We can quote 50. It's this guy with a pen who needs to say no more. So what Teddy's saying is, well, it's not a cultural battle, but we need to convince people that this is going to be better. But what I'm saying is, give someone a pen with a lot of ink to work on these regulations, and this will create opportunities for growth. This is the next thing that I was going to ask you, since you mentioned the state. This is linked to infrastructure, because we need to work on the roads. We know about people that have died on the two-way roads that should have been turned into highways. Well, that is something that needs to be built together with a state that needs to do those things. What are the quick things that the state should do? And as you tell us, I will take a look at the questions, and please go ahead and send over your questions to the QR. You have a QR. One of the most evident things is that we have a number of specific allowance taxes. For example, the highway tariff. There is this person that has been paying a highway tax for years, but the road had never been built, so she took the state to court. She won it. But do we have to sue everyone to get our rights respected? So if there is a specific allowance for something, okay, well, that should be done, but we should prioritize things. First of all, health, education, and infrastructure. The rest, it would be welcome if we might be able to pay for it. But Argentina believes that it can afford to do lots of things while it does not do productive things. When the first soybean dollar was established in September 2022, that was 1 month after the minister took office. He said, I am going to suspend this and this, as well as infrastructure. So there's this soybean dollar that will create greater income, and the extra money that is earned is not invested in infrastructure, but rather social plans, welfare. We have a serious problem in connection with assigning priorities. Where does that money go? Nowadays in Argentina, we have a budget for infrastructure that does not exceed 1.5%. That is for total national income. Is that all right? And we also have budgets that amount to 5 to 9% for other items, which are nice to have, but they will not necessarily foster greater productivity. It is preferable to invest everything in infrastructure for 5 years, lower costs, lower deaths on the road, for example, and then invest in prettier, nicer things. Of course, that requires conviction on people's side, which is difficult to attain. My vision is slightly different. I agree with what Diana has said, but the problem with infrastructure in Argentina has to do with the fact that we are not a federal country. We are a country where income is federal and collection is unitary. So it depends on whether in a truly federal country, the collections will be made by the mayor. I would not mind paying my 2% of my property if my property increases value by 5%, because the security system is good, the schools are good, the security is good, and I would not mind paying 2% over my farm. I do not have a farm. But if I had a farm, I would be willing to pay it if the governor of the province established an infrastructure system with that money that would increase the value of my land. As the country is not truly federal, what we have is a federal expenditure system. Society asks the ruler for things that are not really important. So we have poor spending, we have lots of state employees and civil servants, and we do not have money for infrastructure. So it's very hard for this system to have a logic system for spending and infrastructure. The US has a very highly federal tax system, same thing for Switzerland and other countries. In the US, when the law was passed, they had a Jefferson and a Hamilton. Here we just had an Alberti who never had his Hamilton. Our tax system is highly centralized. I totally agree that revenue sharing at the federal level needs to change, but give me time. We will arrive, we will get there. But it's a perverse system, of course. If we ask for something which is society needs to begin to understand that the incentive system needs to be aligned with behavior. Moreover, in the US, farmers had 40 acres, that is 20 hectares. In Argentina, after the conquest of the desert at the beginning of the 20th century and the war against Paraguay, millions of hectares were assigned. And nobody would pay for what they had. They paid based on what was sent out into the market. That is to say, it was the VAT that was paid. This led the tax collection system to become a unitary one, plus the Buenos Aires customs. So we need to understand the history of Argentina to know where the solution will come from. Many people's frustration has to do with asking a bunch of politicians to go against their true interests. We need to align politicians' interests with the incentives. If we do not achieve that, it will be just words on paper. I can also win elections by spending more money and having a blanket list where nobody's really knows who he's voting for. More questions for Diana. Do you agree that Argentina and especially agriculture should implement policies of state that do not change with governments? In that case, what do you need from agriculture to achieve that? How can we help? Well, the thing is, what policies of state? Withholdings do not change with administrations. They have existed for a long time. Let us pick rightly, because if you have certain policy that is poor remains, well, Argentina needs policies of state. And the first one is equality before the law. Argentina violates that all the time. Withholdings against agriculture are one example. Discrimination with regard to tariffs is another example. Soybean dollar, corn dollar, subsidies for poultry, subsidies never for pork, for example. Those are things that should not exist. The thing is, how do you remove those withholdings so that you eliminate them completely? Because if you remove only 3 restrictions or 3 withholdings out of a total of 100, it does not necessarily improve things. Agriculture needs to be allowed to produce. If you allow me to talk about the exchange rate as well, you've mentioned a lack of foreign currency here. At a given point in time, Argentina needs to eliminate this absurd system where the dollars belong in the central bank. At a given point in time, we should have a currency freedom. These are things that are not discussed in other countries. Farmers in Uruguay and Brazil, etc., they do whatever they want with their exports. They may reinvest them. It's not that you need to give them to a civil servant who will tell you how much your work is worth. So that will take a while to explain, but it will also take a while to carry out. Teddy, on that point, what does agriculture need to ask for? More industry, more mining, more jobs in Argentina. That's what agriculture should ask for, because agriculture has become the last resource provider and the first resource provider, yes. So in order for agriculture to be the source of all wealth, it should stop being that. So it's a famous dichotomy. People say agriculture should say, let's have more mining, let's have more industry so that the sources of wealth are more distributed, better distributed. So the cost of maintaining the country does not fall just on agriculture. And also a simple example, when the gas pipeline was built, so there was a special tax for this gas pipeline that is for everyone. Well, how come the state creates or builds a gas pipeline in order to help more companies export more? So if I'm paying a tax, the gas pipeline should be mine. So we would be owners of a 0.0% of the pipeline. But we are handing over resources. If that activity is going to be profitable, it should be paid by the person that is going to use it. And if not, it should be paid by as few people as possible, and not all of the inhabitants.
But going back to the dollars, we need someone with their activity to do whatever they want, to sell it upstream, downstream. If they want to buy the field in front or go to live abroad, they do what they want. Or what do we do with the forestry law? They are going to fix the renting renting price. They will determine the production cycle and determine the upcoming crop. It doesn't have any agricultural point of view, any logical or philosophical point of view. We cannot allow somebody to tell us what we should do. That's why you have your own agronomist or your own experience, but it's not possible for a secretary to tell you how much you have to collect or pay for a rent. So we will quickly round up. Quiz pop. What should happen for the private sector to hire more people and to lower the employment in the public sector. Mine is very simple. It's universal. It's for the existing companies and for the new ones. And it's the possibility of having an insurance to have the third party an outsourcing of for liability or for working liability. How many of you would have come here by car if you did not have the possibility of purchasing an insurance? That's why the same reason why private companies do not take risks, because you have to be crazy to invest in Argentina, how as Lartirigoyen and myself invest. I'm crazy. Lartirigoyen probably is as crazy as I am. To invest those to a country that punishes those who invest, because you never know if you're going to own your own company or not. And with time, the more successful you get, the more seniority you have in the company, the less the company is worth. Having eliminated that problem, all the other problems will fall in a domino effect. I'll start hiring people. The state stop being a subsidy provider because I will pay higher salaries. As people stop retiring because they still have a good employment. Young people want to study. They stop going to live abroad because what we spend in education stays in the country. So there are a lot of positive effects. Let me continue with this example. Every driver doesn't have an insurance. What they say is to forbid other cars to go out. My company is mine. I don't want any competition. No. Everybody has the possibility of going into the streets. They have to take care of themselves. So thus we have a huge demand. We are the SMEs. We need your support. Same rules for all, and you will see how the SME will grow. We have deified the SME with low productivity. We have to make SME to be of high productivity so that they want to be big. In SMEs, Argentina, SMEs don't want to be big because they will appear in the radar. If in the business you have just one store, I don't want to follow your business, and that's when they go and live in another country. 1 minute, Diana, for something that you have forgotten about, that you want to say something. 1 minute. Let me go back to the beginning. We shouldn't think in terms of antagonisms. In fact, when we spoke in the panel, you got surprised that we said it's very probable that we agree on almost everything, because we all know what we have to do to grow. The changes to be carried out in Argentina to be a developed country, we all know them. But it could be hurtful. It could be difficult. You have to acknowledge that that you will have to make changes, that you will make mistakes. Of course, we want everybody to take on the responsibility. Everybody knows what needs to be done. Let's get started. In my case, businessmen tend to think that policies are not coherent. Now that I know many business people, I think that business people are are not very much coherent, because we know we should know what to ask for, to be coherent in what we ask for, and to be mindful of the society where we live and responsible in the society where we live, so as not to be against other Argentines, not to forbid others to go out and drive because I don't have the insurance. Exactly. So you asked for more industry. This is what this Congress is about, this panel is about, how we can generate more industries in our hometowns with what the industries we are working at. So thank you very much, and we will continue in this Congress.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. wonderful panel. We invite you to stay here because one more panel, and briefly we will have a break. I would like to mention some things. What Diana Mondino says, it has always been agro-industry. We should leave dichotomies aside and establish priorities to create incentives for companies to hire more people, to choose state policies right. You have heard many things. If we took some of these suggestions, we would be able to develop a better country. And the next panel will wonder if there's room for everyone in this country. We invite you to stay for the next panel.
Hoy no basta con recibir un buen producto. Hace falta la asesoría y el respaldo de quienes lo producen. Hoy mis hijos me acompañan. Me gustaría ser un referente para ellos, trabajando de manera sustentable para dejarles un futuro mejor.
El campo da otro paso adelante. El sistema Speed Agro lleva la eficiencia de aplicación de un 45% hasta un 70%. Entra a speedagro.com o a nuestras redes sociales para asesoría comercial y técnica. Speed Agro, The Greener Standard.